It is estimated that Warren Buffett has donated $56.7 billion to various charities over the course of his lifetime. Now, that's an inconceivable amount for everyone in this room, for all of us. Crazy amount of money. He is currently the 7th richest person alive with a net worth of $145.9 billion. If Warren Buffett were to give away 99% of all his wealth, he would still be a billionaire. We'd be amazed at such generosity. It would be an incredible amount of money. Even the amount that he's given is the most in any modern time that anyone is on record giving. But he'd still be a billionaire. He'd still be the top 1% of everyone who ever lived. He would never go without if he donated 99% of all his income to charity. According to Jesus, there are more impressive donors than Mr. Buffett out there, though donations like his are the ones that tend to make the big news. In our reading from Mark's Gospel today, Jesus takes a seat across from the treasury and begins watching at the offertory time. It's enough to make anyone nervous. And there he watches as people make their contributions. Now, it's the Feast of Passover, so people are extra generous. It's kind of like Christmas and Easter. There's a little bit of a bump in the treasury, no doubt. Many people with considerable means come and they give very impressive sums of money to the temple. But that's not the headline of today's gospel reading. That's merely the context. Amid the many impressive gifts being offered, there comes a widow. And in the same way that the rich were recognized by their bespoke clothing and impressive appearance, there's nothing in particular to commend this woman. In fact, just the opposite. Her appearance betrays her poverty. You can tell just by looking at her, she has nothing and she has no one to provide for her. In her hands are 2 small coins, lepta, as they were known, the most insignificant coin in circulation in the Roman Empire at the time. Each coin was worth about 6 minutes of a day's labor. This donation would not earn her a handwritten thank you from the temple officials, nor will her name be memorialized anytime soon on any of the furniture around the temple. The temple would survive just fine without her donation, and it's likely that were it not for Jesus, it would have gone unnoticed altogether. But Jesus sees this woman. He sees her, and he calls the disciples over to him. He has to call the disciples because they weren't paying any attention to her either. And he calls them and he says, "Look at this woman. Do you see her? She's outgiven everyone here today." Sure, there might have been larger amounts given, but all the donations that have been given are out of people's abundance. You get tax write-offs for that sort of thing. Don't be fooled. Those high-dollar donations, they were conveniently given. This woman's contribution comes at a great inconvenience for her, for she is given everything she has to live on. Now, Mark isn't terribly interested in the psychology of this woman, what possessed her to give this great amount. We're, of course, interested. What would cause a woman like her to give everything she had to live on? I think the only answer that we can come to is faith. A faith and a trust in God's providence. You look at our lesson from 1 Kings this morning, the widow at Zarephath. Elijah comes to her, much like the sort of Pharisees that Jesus seemingly indicts in our gospel reading. It looks like Elijah is there just to take every last thing that this poor widow has. He asks her for food, and she says, well, all I have is this meal here. My child and I were going to eat it, and then I'm just going to resign to the fact that we'll die after that. We have nothing. There's a famine in the land. And Elijah says, well, if that's what you want to think, great, but just could you make me something, please? Elijah is a bit deft. And she does. And Elijah promises her, if you do this, God will provide for you throughout the rest of the famine. You will not want, you will not hunger. You'll be just fine. What incredible faith to believe such a message like that amid the economic conditions of the day. I wonder how often the economic conditions of the day and the fears that there won't be enough contribute to our contributions. But these women in both readings, they exemplify a great deal of faith. A great deal of faith in the providence of God to provide for them. Are we to think that this woman somehow never made money again? That if she did have some sort of job, she didn't go back to it? That if she did beg, that she didn't get more? This is not a lifetime moment for this woman. This is a glimpse into a one-off moment where everything that she has in this moment as an act of worship is offered up to God. And we're not to assume that she never had more money, that she went on to be a beggar and just no. She had faith that wouldn't be the case because she knew the God that she was giving to, a God who always delights in showing mercy. And so our contributions, our generosity, our willingness to give and give and give again, as the hymn says, they ultimately are an act of faith, a declaration of faith, just as we'll stand here in a moment and say, I believe in one God. It wouldn't be liturgically appropriate to do it. But what if we did that every time we placed our offering in the plate? I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. That's what this was for this woman. A declaration of faith that amid the threats of scarcity in the world, she served a God who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, who provides, who cares, and who tends his people. Like a father caring for a child, like a shepherd tending the sheep. God notices not how much, but from how much, one early church father wrote. God notices what you have to say no to, or what you have to give up because of your offering. A priest friend of mine was visiting another Episcopal church earlier this summer. Sat behind a couple who, it was clearly their first time. They seemed disoriented, and they got particularly upset, at least he did. When the offering came, he leaned over to the woman, the man did, and said, there's always a plate. You ever feel that way? There's always a plate. You're sure preaching a lot on money this year, one faithful parishioner bemoaned to me a long time ago. The worst part is, I responded, it's an assignment I can't get out of. Jesus keeps bringing it up. There is always a plate. And the scriptures we read each week have a lot to say about money, about wealth, and about what we do with our possessions. Because our self-reliance will damn us if we're not careful. Following Jesus involves sacrifice, and what we do with our money and our possessions is of spiritual importance. Because the call to deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow Jesus will always come at a great personal cost to us. Following Jesus will always come at a great cost to us because of the one we follow and the one we imitate gave his whole life as a sacrifice to ransom our souls to God. So Jesus lifts up this unnamed woman because her sacrifice anticipates his own. He too will give his life to build a temple, one not made with hands, but with the living stones of everyday saints like this woman. Everyday saints, perhaps like yourselves, who would otherwise go unnoticed were it not for Jesus. So too our gifts in the hands of a living God accomplish something greater than paying insurance costs for our campus or keeping the lights on. They become the means by which lives are transformed and saints are made. Earlier this morning, we had the privilege of baptizing a young girl, Cameron, welcoming her into the house of God. Your generosity makes that possible. It makes possible our ability to transform lives for the sake of the kingdom, for someone to come here and stand in this place and say uncomfortable truths that you spend the rest of your week denying and avoiding, in order that God might get a hold of you and transform you. And each time we give of ourselves and of our possessions, we're proving that to be the case, because we find ourselves transformed with each declaration of faith that we make. Amen.